So while he warms up his instrument and tunes up, I'm just going to introduce Egemen Kesikli from Turkey, who is going to play oud to kick off the second segment. If you're tuning in on live stream from somewhere else in the world, thanks for joining us tonight. We're happy to have you.
Hello. Perfect. My name is Egemen Kesikli. This is called an oud.
Got an oud fan!
Awesome. This song that I'm gonna play and sing, it's written by an Armenian composer, Onno Tunç, and words by Aysel Gürel, a Turkish lyrics writer. It's about a child bride. She was forced to get married when she was 11, and then she had a kid, and it wasn't a boy, so she got killed by her husband. It's kind of like a lament song, and it's in Turkish, and I'm just going to try to translate the first verse. Her name is Unzile. Unzile, the human offspring. 10 sisters, 6 died, growing younger as she gets older, and here comes a husband.
Ünzile insan ölü, 10 kardeşmiş ölü, büyüdükçe ufak ve gelir de görücü, inci gibi dişi, görücü bilir işi, sövdüm ağlar gider, olur hatun kişi, varmadan 8'ine her gün oldun zile. O hem çocuk hem de kadın, 12'sinde ana. Bir gül gibi al ve narin, bir su gibi saydam ve sakin. Susar kadının zile. Yağmur kim döküyor, Ünzile kaç koyun ediyor, dayaktan uslanalı hiçbir şey sormuyor. Yağmur kim döküyor, Ünzile kaç koyun ediyor, dayaktan uslanalı hiçbir şey sormuyor. Korkar durup gitmez köyün en son çetine, İnanır o sınırda dünyanın bitine. İnzile insan dölü, bilinmez dere gebe, Sırların hikmetini yükleyip de beline varmadan sekizine ergin oldun zile. O hem çocuk hem de kadın, 12'sinde ana. Bir gül gibi al ve narin, bir su gibi saydam ve sakin. Susar kadının zile. Yağmuru kim döküyor zile, kaç koyun ediyor. Dayaktan uslanalı hiçbir şey sormuyor. Yağmuru kim döküyor zile, kaç koyun ediyor. Dayaktan uslanalı hiçbir şey sormuyor.
Thank you, Egemen. And now I want to invite Theo Wilson forward for a poem.
Exploring black male privilege through the lens of just the hood I came from, and, you know, hopefully bringing some light to it. This poem is called Mandingo. Go like this. I learned to crip walk on my slave grandmother's ovaries. Boys from the hood ain't never cared about breaking no eggs, hatching misogyny between the grooves of our Converse and the chronic. Compton set the rhythm of my generation's heartbeat. Dr. Dre slapped this lady D. Barnes and sampled the smack and remixed it in like poison in the grits my mother fed me. And we fear commitment like impromptu prison prostate exams. Hillary Clinton called me super predator, Mandingo, dick longer than the mandatory minimum sentence. Nothing new. Soccer moms like that been fucking us since they could shackle us to the shadow. They say our wood is tall as the mast on the good ship Jesus, so you could crucify Christ to my morning erections. Mandingo, bred to be fight niggas. Temper shorted in the neck on Mike Tyson, my nigga. And say niggas so often can't taste overseer's breath bursting from my mouth like muzzle flash in Chirac. I am the steam rising like a spirit from the bullet wound. Heart colder than the frostbitten trigger finger on the black boy too slow on the draw. Like paramedics, barely put on the sirens when they come to the scene. Like this outcome wasn't engineered. Like chalk outlines ain't akin to the red lines that drew the ghetto when white real estate chose where black bodies could freeze. The fates of gangsters be chained together like they breaking rocks and not selling them. My DNA is all too familiar with merchandise. Under the microscope, I am linked to a Mandingo warrior, massa probing his prostate, pants down for all to see, breaking this buck and making change out of his manhood, planting seeds for generations of homophobia in his colon. His grandsons will sag their pants like a dare, like he intrinsically knows he's assed out. They call his neighborhood trapped so many times that when I shoot this brother, kinda sounds like emancipation. Like crackheads ain't field Negroes, this reincarnation. Souls now enslaved to something else white this time. Putting something else but dreams in the pipe this time, since reparations be missing like father figures. Cause black folks is just Africans with their hard drives wiped. Too much salt water washed away our native coding. So we programmed our culture from scratch like mama's grits, but the only manhood ingredients were peppered shards of master's whip. To my slave grandma, I'm sorry for war dancing on your womb. Sorry white feminism wove a slip knot from your fallopian tubes and placed my neck where Thomas Jefferson's belonged. Guess that's what I get for gangster mimicking his massacres. For driving my penis through women's lives like a derailed train through a wall, Mandingo. White slur of word, Mandinka. West Africa, Gambia, where mothers were trees that sprouted songs who ripened into people. When ancestors return as infants, it's the ultimate remix. Tell Dr. Dre I am rinsing the black masculine and the amniotic fluid that sang me back to life. Ain't that a black woman to cleanse you with that dumb shit? bathing your crusty ass ever since she was a fruit tree and you were mango with a symphony inside. Kick off them Converse and conduct yourself accordingly, cuz who set the rhythm to your heart's Mandinka warrior drums? She who broke her body so that you may breathe. Thank you.
So now we go into the Q&A segment. So I just want to open the question we had earlier, kicked off by Carrie, about a woman's power and how can men support women on their own spiritual quest, spiritual journey, and their progression and self-possession of their own power. And that's open to anybody who wants to talk. And just do a quick check if you're speaking up for Jim.
Okay, I'm Mike C. Wait, you got me? Okay. I was thinking about this, so I'm going to equate it to another movie maybe some of you have seen, because that's what I do. So who saw the movie Phenomenon? With Kira Sedgwick and John Travolta. Okay, so there's problems with consent in that film also, and yet the one good nugget I'll leave you with is she really likes making these chairs out of willow, and he buys her chairs. Like, that's her thing, and he buys all of her chairs so she can keep making chairs. So that's my advice. If you want to support women on their journey, figure out what their chair is and buy it. And to go a little bit further, if you're not quite sure, start with simple things, like don't police women's bodies, don't police our words, don't police our actions. So I'll leave it there.
Anyone else want to chime in or add?
I work with a lot of young people, and some are women, some are men, some are trans, some are cis, some are white, some are people of color. And it's just interesting how often the young white boys and then white men have a confidence about them. So when there's an opportunity to apply for some opportunity, people that have been socialized not to jump right away at that will find all the reasons why they're not good enough to get the scholarship, to get picked for whatever it is. So something that my coworkers and I say between us is channel your mediocre white man. When you're questioning yourself, am I good enough to try? We're channel your mediocre white man. And that's something that started as a joke, but it's, but I see people, and I do it to myself, and there's something called the imposter syndrome, where women are socialized, even when we're experts in the field, to always feel like we don't know as much as someone else or whatever it is. I was joking with Camilo that there was a company that looked into their own wage gap, between men and women, and they found out that they had it, and they looked into it, and they discovered that it could be completely explained because the men in their company had lied about the years of experience on their resumes and the women hadn't. And compensating for that, their wage gap vanished. And that's not to overstate our expertise or our knowledge or whatever it is, and we tell young people all the time that they don't know anything, right? The way that we interact with young people really is disempowering, and then all the layers of other identities in that. But just to really encourage people that you see them doubting themselves, I find asking them really what they are experts in, which is their experience, and how that's been discounted by so many people, and how we really need those voices in more platforms. Just channel your inner white man.
I found clinically that, typically men have a moment of sadness and then we go right into anger. And we're so uncomfortable with the sadness that we'll get really pissed off like right away. And women have typically a moment of anger and then go right into sadness. And I think both sexes are better off staying with their initial hit. You know, like if you have a moment of anger as a woman, ride it, because it provides a boundary, it provides safety, it provides some kind of consequence if someone fucks with it. Whereas if you're a man, that danger is always sort of understood. So we're better off if we can stay with the sadness rather than go into the anger, because the sadness is where we typically avoid. And in avoiding that, we avoid actually sensitivity. And by going angry, we can get angry, and then we can get even angrier, and then we can go numb. So once we're numb, we're out of the game. So another way to support your partner as a man is to stay with the sadness. As a woman is to stay with your anger, trust it, grow it, and, make it appropriate and realize at first it's not going to be elegant. But as you become more comfortable with it, it will provide a boundary and will provide something that someone has to be very conscious of going across that, knowing that there's going to be a consequence. And so for women to really, I feel, hold your power is to hold that initial moment of anger and don't go into the sadness so easily. And for men, hold on to the sadness. So.
I think that there's this huge canyon that's being overlooked when it comes to the safety of women. And that is the world of violence between men. The world of violence between men. Like, I remember growing up, the thing I'm navigating is this bruh, possibly bigger, possibly stronger, possibly faster. I don't got time to hear about female safety. I'm trying not to get beat down, right? In this part of my brain, the things that imprint males toxically happen to us when we are too young to question them. You say you will always know what a boy will turn out like by the boy he loses a fight to and the boy he loses a girl to. Sometimes they the same boy. And when that happens, no logic can get through. You are stunned at that moment, and emotionally maturing past that point means that I should have exacted more force. I should have been more direct with these girls. I should have been more alpha with them, supposedly. And so that woundedness that my sister talked about when she was like, we don't feel individually empowered. We're not feeling individually empowered because we ain't trying to catch the beat down from the dude who we think is going to check us for standing up for women. So if we don't navigate the violence, I'm talking about the men. If we don't navigate the violence between us, the residual overflow is going to continually, perpetually, no matter how smart and trained we get from women, if we don't take care of this issue, it's not going away. So that's what I want the men to address, the violence between each other.
And I'm so glad that actually you did go first, because I would like to dovetail off of that and say that it's important in order for women's stories to become recognized and witnessed fully, it's important for men to also have an expressive, intimate relationship with their own bodies beyond sexuality and eroticism. So it is important for men to be able to understand that it shouldn't take a medical crisis at midlife for you to suddenly understand that the instrument with which you walk is multidimensional and expressive, right? And I would really like to encourage men, encourage your sons to go into the expressive arts, encourage your men and your sons and your brothers to understand that contemplative traditions and movement traditions and other ways of relating to their own bodies will help them to understand the sacredness of the female body as well. And until those boundaries begin to break down, men will continue to see women's bodies as playthings. And that is the part that needs to be challenged most strongly in your perception of us. The words can be doctored, right? And the songs will be censored, and everything will be washed over so that it's publicly acceptable. But at the root level, at the most intimate level, when you are with your lover, when you are expressing yourself lovingly, how do you perceive the body of the person that you are with? And can that be multidimensionalized beyond just a shape?
Thank you.
I just want to dovetail on what you said because I work, with music and the healing aspects of music. And I just want to throw this little research tidbit out there. The more musical education a child has, the less likely they are to be involved in any sort of criminal activity. It's huge. What you just said about incorporating the expressive arts into your being, especially for everyone, for young boys and young girls. It balances your energies. It gives you another venue, another way of expressing who you are in the world. It's very, very powerful. That's all I wanted to say.
Did you want to add something, Camila?
Okay, I don't know. Okay, so like the image that kind of comes to mind right now is of someone standing on someone's neck and being like, oh, how can I support you to get my foot off your neck? Get your damn foot off the neck. I mean, just like listen to this and internalize this stuff that's being talked about. And it's pretty rudimentary. If like some of these behaviors and attitudes that people are getting called out publicly for ring a bell personally or in your social group, you need to engage with that, and it's ugly, especially now that we're getting into kind of like the real meat of it all, the base of this foundation of like the continuum of sexual violence. So at the top you have extremely violent physical sexual assault, but that apex is only possible because it's being supported by a much bigger foundation of misogyny and sexism and normalization of male privilege, of male entitlement to women's attention, to women's bodies, so I don't know if honestly, like I feel like women have done all right with our foot on their neck for millennia. So I don't know how much support y'all are gonna need if we just take that foot off the neck. I think you're gonna do fine. You're already doing fine with that context. So I think the attention really should be on how can men support other men, because that is the crux of the matter. How can you kind of have a way of engaging with the other men in your life, and I'm speaking primarily to the men here, to, as Sarah was saying, get to those pro-social norms that we all, or that the majority of us actually have, that we have put into a little box because we don't want to show our vulnerability to other men and be diminished by that, but that we all do agree on. We all actually agree on most of this stuff. We just don't realize it and aren't performative with it sufficiently that actually this much more unhealthy form of masculinity has been dominating because it sells. This is you cannot detach this also from our consumer capitalist culture, which basically requires us to be disaffected and plays to our fears and anxieties to sell things. And therein lies the root of the objectification of women and sexuality. But what I would just say is try. Get really familiar with the term, that's not cool, yo. Get used to using it with people around you. And I will just throw out one little tool that I found really useful in having these conversations, men to men. And it's shorthand VCR, which fortunately don't look like too many millennials here who won't understand what that is. But VCR, validate. When you hear something that you want to call out, if you jump on it immediately and you're like, that's sexist, that's horrible, you're going to lose the person right away. So it starts helpfully by empathizing with where they're coming from, how they arrived at that position. Validate it somehow. Say like, I know what you mean. I've sometimes felt that. I used to think that way. But just give yourself a little foot and toe in the room where then they can relate to you as okay, this person isn't judging me, this person is a peer. Then you need to step into the C, challenge. Bridge the where they are and where you think they should be. Challenge them. You know, you can use some stats. You can use a personal anecdote. You can use, just build, question whether that statement was based on a valid assumption, and then end it with a request, R, VCR, and request that maybe they not speak that way around you. That's just a place to start. Look, hey, I have a lot of people in my life who have been survivors of the kind of stuff you're joking about. Just please don't talk like that in front of me. Something like that. But validate first, then challenge, and then make a request. This is what I have found has been a very helpful tool in my conversations around this.
Thank you. All right, let's take a question from the audience.
So my question for the panel is, how do we bring this conversation to the youth? That's the question. I have a 15-year-old daughter. She's at Niwot High School. She came from a Waldorf school background, so she was very centered in who she is. She did her freshman year, and 2 weeks into her sophomore year, she called me from school and said, I cannot be in this negative environment. Now, mind you, Niwot High School just ranked as the #1 high school in all of Colorado. It is the top performing high school in Colorado. When you walk into their cafeteria, their atrium, their central space, there is a portrait of Chief Niwot, supposedly. He doesn't look like Chief Niwot. He looks like He-Man, Master of the Universe. I am not not kidding. And there's not a woman in the portrait. There's him and a cougar, because it's Niwot High School Cougars. My daughter has had a lot of online conversations with young men from her high school, and we ended up taking her out of high school. She's still very much engaged with the high school. She plays sports for them, but she's doing independent studies. And when we took her out of high school, her male peers accused her publicly, online, on social platforms, of withdrawing from high school to become a full-time feminist, which we thought was kind of funny. But that's not why no. She started a project called Project Confidence. It's, she's just starting her thing. So the question is, how do we bring this conversation to our youth? And then I would just like to actually invite you to come and speak to Niwot High School. I'm going to talk to the principal about that.
The work that Mesa is doing with youth in Boulder Valley School District, we have a couple different programs. So one of them is going into health classes to do an 8-session curriculum on resisting violence and strengthening relationships. And we go into oppression and privilege and power and consent and boundaries and communication and gender socialization and domestic violence and sexual assault. And we have an after-school program that lets kids get much deeper into those things and do their own projects around things that they're passionate about. Some schools let us have all 8 sessions, some don't. It seems like a lot of youth are resisting, and that they're like feeling alone in resisting and feeling like they're uncomfortable with the school culture. And I think most high schools probably have a pretty toxic culture of bullying and harassment, and we see like youth suicide rates. So the model for the club, for the Men of Strength Club, is essentially like a group of guys with male mentors sit around once a week and talk about, the first half is what they've been taught about the dominant stories of masculinity, and the second half is counter stories and sort of unlearning that and developing their own stories around masculinity. There's a parallel club for women. That's what we've been taught, what it means to be a woman, women in the media, and then unlearning those things. And I think the role model piece is really important, because I think a lot of teachers in the schools are like sticking with a curriculum and don't have space to address the cultural pieces of the school. And they have so much work and little support to go beyond what they're already doing. And there isn't, I don't think, a very good like structural mechanism in schools to address school culture. So these clubs are one way that they're trying to pull influential students that can then create a new social norm within that group to then be influencers in their own groups of friends. So if you get some of the athletes and some of the drama kids and some of the band kids, and you give them a space with a role model where they can unpack that stuff and then like redevelop it together, that they can lean on each other then as allies to go back and start influencing their groups. But without intentional programming directed at changing school culture, these kids are on their own and they feel like they're on their own. And the fact that like she knows who she is, so she can't assimilate to that, is like so powerful and so telling of how toxic that culture is.
Yes, I'll just briefly say the like in the trenches frontline work is so important that Sarah's talking about, but HOLLYWOOD, Hollywood. It's like the media. Well, so for one, is teaching media literacy so that young people understand what they're being sold and why they're being sold that. But the other thing is, I mean, when you look at other advances in cultural change, cultural evolution, I mean, I think like the biggest one of the last 20 years has definitely been the LGBTQ rights issue. And I mean, that really was fought and won in a cultural space. And so this is why, I mean, what we create and how we consume it is so important. So I'm actually really bullish about what's going to happen when the masters of our cultural sphere start to internalize and implement some of these insights that have been accumulating for a long time.
One thing that we do know is that when women and people of color direct films, they actually hire more diverse crew and actors and writers, and so we actually tell stories in a different way than what we're used to seeing. And yet Hollywood still thinks that the way you make money is you put a bunch of white guys together and maybe there's a hot girl and maybe there's the like sidekick who's a person of color, and then they go on some adventure, right? So one of the things that we can do is to resist. No, I know you're laughing because you're like, yeah, I saw that movie. I've seen like 100 of those movies. Like, and was it based on a comic book? Oh yeah, and they're still doing that. So the best thing we can do is vote with our dollars, right? 2 resources I'll share with you is you can sign up for the Women in Hollywood. It's a weekly newsletter, and it lets you know what films are directed, written, and starring women that are coming out in movie theaters. And then there's an app called Tanji, and it's TANJI, and it's the same thing. So that's one way to help. I'll say that Hollywood's not the only offender, though. I mean, video games also horrible. The way they portray masculinity and femininity and the stories that are involved in that, and that's the interactive stuff, right? Where you get to choose a character and go along with them. You've talked about music. Music is also a big offender. Like there's these are all cultural tropes, right? These are storytelling mechanisms that we use to reinforce the status quo. So we have to subvert that. And one of the big ways to do it is don't go and see the stuff that you don't want to see anymore. And the second way is, I mean, seeing and supporting these other media makers, and we do have a diverse, media group in Colorado that if we support their stuff, that helps them get the next deal or raise more money so they can take their film to the next audience. So I do feel that there is, at least in my community of media makers, and it's not just Colorado, it's diverse. We have felt a sense of social responsibility for a long time. You know, we're not just since October, since Weinstein's stuff came out, finally going, you know, we should really change the culture. We're finally just have a megaphone about it instead of a walkie-talkie, right? And what I'm seeing is the backlash right now. Like, we can't let this be the original, or excuse me, second wave feminism that came out, you know, in the 70s. Its message got diluted down to white women and abortion. Well, if you don't fit that, you move away from it. And that, because it became one issue, everybody got to make fun of it, and then the pendulum swung the other direction, right? So again, this is why the intersectionality of all of this Me Too stuff, you know, including people of color, including the LGBTQ community, including men when they share their Me Too stories, like that's all important. And I love the fact that you had mentioned that we're getting to the bottom levels of the pyramid right now, and it's getting a lot messier, and that's gonna make us wanna move away from it. And instead we have to lean into it.
Thank you. I wanna, you wanna add? Okay.
To your point about children, that in Eastern medicine they say that men tend to have vertical relationships and women tend to have horizontal relationships. And it means that men tend to do better in a hierarchy, like someone above us, someone below us, and we can fit into that very easily. Whereas women tend to need things to be more equal. And in that case, I think that mentorship is very important, because as young men, if we get a man over us who's not very cool, we tend to either struggle with, you know, not being very cool or mirror it. Whereas women, I think, like if you can find someone that your daughter respects and that, you know, has a good, strong life and is really showing the qualities that she really values, you know, putting her in touch with someone like that might be really useful, because we have to be careful who we take our qualities from and who we want to be around. And so for men, I think, you know, the person above them is really important. For women, who they choose to learn from is really important.
Thank you. So we're gonna invite Donna back for a dance.
This next short piece was strangely not prompted by me. It was a response to an inquiry from a friend that said, what does sovereign female sexuality look like? What does self-possessed sensuality look like? And so we'd like to take this moment to offer a reclamation dance.
let's take another question.
My friend James that was just here had a question for his parenting, because his daughter, one of his daughters, I don't think it's the one that was here, I think another one of his daughters is listening to hardcore rap misogynistic music, and she's a woman. And he's like, I don't know what to do to deal with this. Like, if she herself isn't understanding what she's listening to, how do I as a parent talk to her about this in a way that's not just telling her not to listen to that crap music, but in a way that's having her to understand what that's doing on such a deep level, not just for her, but for all of us, you know? And that was his question, and I'm asking for you guys for that.
See, this is a difficult question because I don't know how the parenting style is. In my house, certain things were just off limits by brute force. And that was a parenting decision. And I'm glad that my pops made certain decisions like that until I was old enough to understand what I was listening to, in the sense that, like, I heard it from my friends, but I couldn't get it in my house. You see what I'm saying? So even that led to the course correction I eventually went down. It planted the seed that let me question what my culture was telling me. And I don't know how, you know, you do that in y'all's household, but and also, but if you're one of those more like you know, parents that relate and explain, then I would explain the brainwave function. What happens to the limbic system of the brain when you hear a rhythm, how it puts you to an altered state, and it's easy to program, dropping suggestions into the subconscious mind. How the brain ain't really done forming until you're 24. She sounds like she's younger than that. Meaning that these paradigms could slip in there and become a part of your internal monologue. Break down the science of it. That's what I have to do to some kids that I'm mentoring. Because if I don't, you know, and me just being a young black male, like I remember just walking down the street regurgitating some terrible things, not even thinking about it. And so I was like, have you ever had that happen to you? If you get into a fight, who you sound like? You know, your favorite rapper, most likely. So what that means is that you as a parent have the power to direct the course of inquiry. And I don't know if y'all have the relationship to actually cut that off, but I remember like my dad was like, none of that. You know what I mean? And the funny thing was, by the time I got to college, he was listening to Tupac, right? But he did it because he had a context, and I understood his context, and I slowly weaned my way away from it. But it was because he planted that seed when I was young, so that's what I would do.
And if you, hello, there we go. And if you are one of the kind of parents that likes to be involved, take your child to a live experience with a conscious poet, rapper. There are plenty. And we're not just talking rap, we're talking rock, we're talking electronica, we're talking all genres of music, country, right? And so get involved. Rather than criticizing the music, get involved and just get some tickets and go, or volunteer backstage so they actually might get the VIP experience and connect with a conscious artist. But make sure that you're not a passive bystander. I think it's the passive bystander syndrome that makes us feel as if it's a tidal wave that's going to roll over our heads and our children will be raised by the mainstream media instead of by us. So get involved.
Yeah, I've also, it's a B. I've also noticed that a lot of times there's people that get really hopeless and very depressed, and they'll listen to hip hop and they'll actually feel like they can move. They can get angry instead of being just depleted or in desolation. So I would say if the girl is actually in a lot of emotional pain, see if that's actually giving her some kind of boost that she might be able to get somewhere else, but that is an indication of what she needs. It might be making her feel better.
We've been talking about a lot of things about what men can do. I think we also need to address what women can do. And we need to recognize that we still have this double-edged sword of patriarchy and the types of roles that women have in society. And not everybody recognizes that. I mean, I'm surprised at the number of women in their 20s who have said to me recently, like, I don't understand why you think that women somewhere gave up their power. And I was like, whoa, that's where you are? Like, that's kind of amazing that you feel like you've never given up your power, and like, let's start peeling back some layers, right? And I think one of the first things, especially for young girls, is we don't feel very powerful. Our brains don't make us feel very powerful, sadly. So it usually comes from beauty and sexuality, right? The way other people perceive her. So there could be something in the messaging that she's, latching onto. Maybe that's a part of her power that she's exploring. And so if there's a way also to turn, whether it's anger or whether it's powerlessness or it's something, help her get in her body and feel powerful in a different way. I think that might be a way to steer her away.
Dovetailing off of that brilliant comment, yes to that. As a dancer, I deal with this on occasion, that the ability to captivate is somehow powerful, but the truth is it's a false power. And teaching both men and women, young men and young women, that, and all gender expressions in between that binary of male and female, that really it doesn't translate to economic power, it doesn't translate to political power, it does not translate to personal power just to look good, right? But that your power is in how you feel. Your power is in the truth you're able to mirror in your life. Your power is in your ability to have a backbone and morals and to treat others with respect. And so getting away from visual culture, to me, is a big part of enriching all of us, which sounds strange coming from a dance performer, I know. But for me, the study of dance is not necessarily about visual culture. It's about the study of consciousness in the body. Yeah. And so I just wanted to say amen to that.
Just on another note, I was thinking as people were talking, I think as women, and I think young women, we're often in a position where we have to borrow someone else's voice to feel and say and validate what we're feeling. And when that voice is a powerful voice, we can gravitate to it and let it do what we're not doing. And I wonder sometimes, I've worked with a lot of kids down the years in lots of different ways. Listening, just what is that person wanting to say that they can't and they haven't found words for and they feel disconnected from in their own body and their experience, that they are finding a voice to say it for them, and often it's a voice that they'll pull from something that, they'll grab the master's tool sometimes, right, to say that thing, and encouraging them to begin to just talk and express without judgment, without just to maybe not even addressing the music, just being with them and helping them find some kind of articulation. And I'm huge on the body being part of that, but sometimes that body comes later. Someone doesn't like their body and feels weird in their body, and that their body, they don't know how to be in it. Just being with them and hearing whatever it is they have to say, even if it's, yeah, that was a sound that you made from your body, that's cool. And just beginning with that. And I don't know, that's just what came to me as you were talking.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to everyone, to all the speakers and the artists for what you've shared tonight. It's been so powerful. It's been really awesome. Thank you. And so I noticed what's coming up for me is this idea of the empathy field and how it's growing, and how the me first attitude, which has expressed itself in our culture as a lot of men abusing their power. I had a conversation with my partner Tesla at the intermission. We live in a cooperative household. And, I'm thinking about all these high thoughts, like the empathy field and this and that. And she says, well, when's the last time you cleaned the bathroom? So, and it brought me back down to earth. And so my question is, for each one of you, if you care to answer and however you care to share, is in your personal relationships, how is the empathy field showing up?
Can you define the empathy field a little better, brother? I want
The empathy field. It's feeling what the other is going through, actually having a physical experience or some sort of intuition of what the other is feeling, so that you become one with that person, even if it's just momentary.
A lot of that depends on how tuned in you are to your own body. We get disconnected from ourselves, and that is a disconnection from that very field. I think it's always talking. It's always vibrating. Humans are like tuning forks like that. What you feel often just radiates off you whether you want it to or not. And men, we get trapped in our heads a lot. You know what I mean? So I think that this new epoch in history, where the more energetically feminine values are now coming into our space, first it ruffles our feathers. Then it asks us some hard questions. Those of us who are more emotionally courageous will tap back in. And it's just, it seems like it's going to be a time thing. How I do it is I meditate. I'm in touch with, well, you said music, like I'm a composer, so I'm in touch with my spirit and feelings and whatnot. But to the next man, all I could do is be an example through my life and through my poetry and through what I do in my life. And hopefully that inspires the next cat to want to tap into himself so he could even feel his own feelings. And when you start to feel your own self, you can feel other people too.
I would say something, but I'm a man, so I'd like someone else to say something.
I just find, like, working with young people, no one's ever talked to them about empathy before. So we'll start talking about it. We'll watch that, like, animated Brene Brown clip, and they're like, why hasn't anybody ever talked to me about this before? Same thing with consent. They're like, why hasn't everybody ever told me this before? But I think it, like, sort of instantly means something to people. And I mean, it's just sort of amazing working with people that are, like, putting up a front where you, like, don't really know what's behind it, and somebody will show up in, like, a really aggressive way and you're not sure what's going on. It might be, like, months down the line that they are like, oh yeah, a few months ago something happened in my family, and, like, they make it just really hard to, like, actually connect, because there is that, like, intentional protective layer. So along with modeling, like, I think empathy is a skill that we're not teaching for many cases, and I think it's something that we are constantly needing to practice and to work on. And I've done work in my personal life around nonviolent communication, and I've found that to be a really useful tool to being able to, like, get to those deeper places faster or more effectively. But I would really love to see it taught and reinforced as, like, a life skill, because I think it can, that we're living in isolation in a lot of cases, and that we all have that natural instinct, but that we've been taught in most cases to detach rather than connect.
I feel like, in my personal life, the things that I notice I'm struggling with is, or in the way of coming to empathy, is my own internal dialogue, as you mentioned, that, we spend a lot of time talking to ourselves as humans, and to create a witness that actually sees what we say to ourselves and then what the reaction is takes a long time, I feel, as a man especially. And to get to the point where I can actually see what I'm saying or what I'm thinking, and then see how that might affect my partner is sort of new for me. Like maybe in the last 10 years, I've been able to actually do that with some effectiveness. And I feel like part of the ability to actually empathize with your partner is, well, just take a step aside. I feel like for men especially, I'm not saying that it's not the same for women, but I know it's the same for men, is that we need to be healthy, we need to have fairness. Like if we're not fair, we don't stay healthy. And so the part about empathy is like if I'm doing something and my partner's not, I can say, okay, she's actually being kinder than I am. And that helps me take a moment and go, what's in the way of me being kind, or what's in the way of my empathy, or what's in the way of caring for her the way I'd like to? Am I not because I'm macho? Am I not because I'm just being pissed off? Or am I stuck in my own head and my own story? And so I think developing a witness within yourself about where you are and what your internal dialogue is saying can really help us with the empathy part.
The naming of things, just being conscious. That's where you start with everything, just becoming aware of everything. And that could just be like how you're breaking down your domestic work, right, in the house, and what kind of gender norms you're falling into. But, it can also be something like what's going on with the sex life, right? Like, who's that for? What is, and this is where it's getting kind of real and uncomfortable, but we need to go there. Like, why, who is this sex for? Who is initiating it for why? And just kind of unpacking that. I think there's a lot of groundwork that can then build up to a lot more equity by exploring that. And I don't know if you guys saw, last week, Samantha Bee, who you should all be watching, she was in her response to the Aziz Ansari thing, and she had an interesting line that I thought I'd share, which is, if you call yourself a feminist as a man, well, then you better fuck like a feminist. And and I mean, it's an interesting construct, but it's I mean, a lot of these roles and they're so deeply ingrained, and we cherish so much kind of this the sexual culture that we have and we possess, and as men we are in a dominant position in, and it's not until we start kind of getting into that nitty gritty, and there's no one better to do it than with your partner, that you're gonna kind of start to see how that is kind of in some ways at the root of all of this stuff.
I'll give two very, very small tips that hopefully people can take away. The first one is value cuddling. It's so simple, but I'm bringing it up because thank you. Take the sex and the sexual attraction out of that and just get into the affection and heart to heart, head to head with somebody, because man, that the walls come down, and that's when you can have some of your most tender conversations with the other person. And the other thing that I do in my relationships is, if I'm not quite sure whether my partner is ready for physical contact because they're really going through something, I'll ask, is it okay if I give you a hug? And it's now built into our relationship where if he's not ready, he'll make it clear that he's not ready for that. And I will leave it at, I'd like to give you a hug. When you're ready, let me know. It's simple stuff. And I mean, we started doing that on our first date. I started modeling this, and I'm sure he was like, what did I get myself into? Like, this woman is bringing things up. Like, I'm not sure what I want to do. She's like telling me what she's enjoying in bed. Like, I don't know. And yet we're in a much deeper place, I think, because we've valued that communication. And I mean, we had some really hard times right around the election. I got very triggered. That triggered a bunch of stuff in our relationship. And we went back to couples counseling, and our homework was cuddle. So when in doubt, cuddle.
Yeah, I'd like to add something medically. It's B again. Men are expansive and women are receptive. And so when a man ejaculates in a woman, that energy stays in her body 3 to 5 days. So if the man isn't feeling positive toward the woman, that's a lot of toxic energy you're holding for a long time. And it doesn't have to be just seed, like the energy without a condom too. The energy is very palpable. So if a man doesn't like you or isn't liking you in that moment, don't sleep with him. Like, you're going to be taking that energy on. And it's really important that you really protect yourself in that way, because expansive energy is really strong. And if you think about bad relationships, how often people might be making love when they're not actually liking each other. And it's really unhealthy, but the woman holds it in her, whereas a man gets it out of him. So, you know, it's not equal in that sense, that you guys actually have to, you women have to protect yourselves more than men do emotionally and physically when you're making love with a man. You have to make sure he's really into you and really likes you. You can't do it if he's wishy-washy or anything like that. It's really unhealthy. So just to add that.
Thank you. I want to invite Nikki Talk to do a poem.
It's another poem in the Big O series. Queen Gertrude says, describing Ophelia's death, "There on the pendant boughs her coronet weeds, clambering to hang, an envious sliver broke, when down her weedy trophies and herself fell in the weeping brook. On the moist bank, clutch of chickweed, that is all. Runnel, willow bark, ghost. How then to fall? What holds you must no longer press your belly into cracks, wait for the wood to envy your desire for water enough to split, break. But if rooks grasp your hair, rush you upwards before you are ready, all you desire is down. All you fear, netted black feathers, spindle beaks carve at the careful sky, onyx, measured, quiet. Fly here, souse the water. Dipping your eyes, they catch clouds below the moss where the birds cannot reach. Carrion hunters, requiem in their throats. Talons flicker once, requiem, or concerto for a girl, a stream, and feathers. Thanks.
And I want to invite Egemen and whoever wants to join in on his song. So we've got Charlie Rose on trumpet. We've got Dexter Payne on clarinet.
Actually, not this one. Oh. Or is that this one?
Christina.
You should still play along. Okay.
Christina Sofia on voice and Egemen Kesikli on oud.
So this is a Turkish song, a very old Turkish song, and it's about the longing, a longing to come home. And it's kind of, I think, kind of what we're doing here, aren't we? Longing to come back to what's really true and what's really right, and be in a loving environment. So that's kind of what we're singing about.
Oh
So I'd like to take one last question from the audience, and then we'll close out with another song from Bullington and one more ensemble piece with everybody. So question.
Wanting to hear from our wonderful panelists suggestions for the most powerful and simple step that we can encourage our young women to take. We've been talking about some women 14, 15 years old, and pre-puberty and puberty and adolescence feels like such an important time as we're building our impressions. And so I'm interested in focusing in on that moment in becoming womanhood and hearing ideas for supporting the most beautiful becoming, or most empowered becoming, most wholesome becoming. Riffing on that. And you can wrap that into your question too if you want.
Cool. Tag teaming. So that plus the element of a woman's own ability to claim her sexuality in a healthy, holistic, self-possessed way from that age onward.
I think one of the things that I learned that really set me up for owning my body and not necessarily viewing it as something that was there for other people was, and this, I know we're live streaming, so the comments will be interesting, but I was never taught that masturbation was bad. It was very early on. So the first time any body exploration was happening, both mom and dad made it very clear, that's healthy. You're allowed to do that. You just do that alone in your room. Cool. There were some times I did not leave my room. And honestly, it really formulated for me that I was in charge of my body, and why did I need anybody else involved? Because I could do that for myself. And I mean, I taught other friends, not showed them, taught them, but I told them, taught them how they could do that. I mean, and it amazed me that even moving up through high school and college, I had girlfriends who, no, I don't do that. They could have been lying, but maybe they weren't, right? So just developing that concept of body ownership and self-pleasure, I think are two really important things. And I know it makes it difficult and uncomfortable and messy for parents to try to have those conversations, but I really think that if we're talking very early formative kind of experiences, that's the one that stands out for me. Anyone else want to follow that juicy topic? What else you got?
Yeah. Masturbation's a hard act to follow, but but in line with that, I would also just say being empowered to say what you want in your sexual life. I think one of the interesting points about this whole Aziz Ansari, and if you're not familiar with it, you should just look it up. It's a fascinating focal point of this moment. Is a lot of the challenges to this woman's account is well, why didn't she leave, or why didn't she just explain what she wanted and speak up? And it's because for 22 years, she's 22 years old, she's been told to not do that, and that she is there for the man, for the man to look at her, or for the man to find pleasure in her, and so to empower young women to, just communicate. And really what this whole thing is about is opening a channel of communication. That's what all metoo is about. It's just creating this collective reference point so that we can all start having these conversations against this in our lives and as a culture and as a community. And one other little element that I'll throw in, and I want to preface this by saying, it's not women's job to evolve men. It's men's job. It's yes, and dismantling the patriarchy is we have a disproportionate responsibility in that. And that said, though, very specifically looking at like being young, and in that culture, a big chunk of the rationale behind everything that a young boy does is this going to make me popular with girls? I'm just being real. Like I've been there, and I've worked with these kids, and that is a overarching rationale. And young women do have a lot of agency and a lot of power in modeling the kind of masculinity that they find attractive, and that they find valuable, and that they find meaningful in their life. And again, it's not their job to do this, but the masculinity that they that will make a healthier world for all of us. Them articulating that or finding that valuable is going to pay dividends in the masculine culture.
I have a 15-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old girl. They're all girls. And I have worked in all-female education for about 15 years, so I've seen a lot of girls. I was one about 5 years ago, no. And this is kind of, I don't know, this might seem really simplistic, but I feel keeping your eyes open for what makes them feel alive, and then helping them do more of that. Because I think one of the I use this carefully, dangerous, too strong a word, but when all the conversation, as it needs to be at the moment, is about our sexuality, how we fit in this patriarchal culture, we can forget that there are so many other aspects of being a live, creative young female. There are laws to be made, there are organizations to be made, there are animals to be healed, there are horses to be ridden, there are poems to be written, there are all these other things, not to negate that, it's not an either or, it's a yes and. And I think keeping your eyes, if you're in that position of real privilege where you get to be in that circle of a young woman, watch for it, because it happens as a spark and something happens, might just be a little lift, something. Get in there and notice it, see it, say, oh, I loved your word choice here. That dog really took to you. Wow, you have kind of this way with animals. I notice people really talk to you about their feelings. You've got a lot of empathy. You're a good listener, right? Wow, you're strong. Man, what a good design of that garden, whatever. You put your laundry away really well. I wish I was as organized as you were, right? Whatever, like these little things. And I feel like seeing their success and helping them do more of it, I think is a really, really powerful, underused tool. And I don't think we can use it enough. And it's not pat on the head, shallow praise, like, good job. You tidied your room. No, you should tidy your room. But, the things that just watch for the eye and the chest and the body. So, yeah, that's my little 2 cents.
No, I think it's the same for men and boys too. I mean, like that, it's just not only about being a man that you have to have the role in society, it's just, and which is what we kind of are taught to deal with, just like the idea of being quote unquote strong, the person who takes care of, and etc. And that there are so many other roles that you can actually, again, quote unquote roles that you can actually just teach your child, that it's not all just like, again, you're not a man, you're human, and it's utter coincidence that you happen to be a man, but you could be doing so many other things than being a man.
I just think back to when I was 14 or 15 and what I view as like transformative things for me. And we were talking about expressive arts for boys, and I did Kung Fu for many, many years. And I found that I just had a different relationship with my body than a lot of my female friends, and viewed it like inculcated in that was like valuing strength and like technique and skill. And it wasn't just like am I bigger or smaller than I was a week ago? And bigger could be a good thing, because then maybe I'll beat that kid that beat me last week in wrestling or whatever it is. So even like taking up space was viewed as something positive. And not that martial arts is the only way to get that, but just to be able to practice in a regular way, using your body as a tool, as this whatever and I've heard that theme tonight for both boys and girls. And the other piece, which feels related to that, is just I had the privilege to have leadership opportunities as a young person, where I was like put in a position to do something cool that I didn't think I could do, and then I did it, and I was like, oh, I can do cool things. If I could do that, maybe I could do this. And it was really adults providing those opportunities and telling me that I could do it, and then providing support. But leadership opportunities made me view myself as valuable. And the martial arts piece, I think, also makes me walk around feeling safer. Not that self-defense is the solution to violence prevention, but I've noticed just how I feel like I relate to my body in a much different way than a lot of my female peers. And just feeling really appreciative for those leadership opportunities and that physical expression of our body as a tool.
Yeah. I don't know if this is helpful in that same sense, but anecdotally, I've noticed, like with a lot of my patients who are going through that change, that a lot of the wounds that they seem to accrue are from other girls in their schools. And I feel like that's something that the sisterhood piece has to be more, focused on, because if their elders or women their own age start giving them a hard time, it's very hard for adults to come in. It's something that happens between them. And so I'm not sure I have an answer for it, but I think that that's one of the danger things that happens around that age, especially for young girls, is that they get in with a crowd of nastier girls or harder-headed girls, and they get wounded for many years sometimes by how they have their body image or their image of their intelligence or whatnot. Because older girls can be, older kids can be cruel to younger kids, both sexes. So I don't know if I have an answer for that, but I think for parents to be aware that there might be pressures going on in school around that age that can be very damaging.
I'm trying to figure out if what I got to say is coming from my own toxic masculine programming, man. Straight up. Like, I started thinking, because I don't have a daughter, but I was like, if I had a daughter, she was like 12, and she was like, going into this new high school or something, or middle school, what I'll tell her, truth be told, I don't know. I think that part of it has to do with, be aware, love, that, these boys may be predators even accidentally. So protect yourself like that, Understand that is not to be afraid of them, but just know that they might be this without knowing, and that you can only gauge him by how aware he is of himself. You might be attracted to this young man, but you have to understand, you got to look into his own relationship with, his own ability to be himself. Is he just a pawn of his boy's opinions? I'm assuming that I would inculcate finding her own gifts and her own talents and nourishing that. Making sure that she has a positive relationship with pleasure. Until I started really dating, I really didn't understand how many women didn't have a positive relationship with pleasure, the reward system of the body, So that shame stuff, I'm definitely not raising my daughter with. But the rest of it is like, be aware that sometimes this life ain't fair. And sometimes you're going to have to be on guard. Know that daddy's going to get involved if it hit the fan, real talk. But before that, I would just say part of your freedom is tied to your awareness. Be aware.
Anyone want to add anything else before we close out with some healing music? Thank you so much.
Wow, this has been a very powerful experience. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your perspectives on this topic. I decided to choose this song to share with you guys. It's based off of a poem that I wrote years ago. And it's about vulnerability. And some of you kind of touched on the power of emotions and how there is so much power in being able to communicate what you're feeling, and not only to other people, but to yourself. So this song is about that. It's about vulnerability. It's about being honest with yourself in the moment. Like, how am I feeling? You know, being aware of that, being aware of the emotions, and how there's so much power in that. Because I think on just a basic level of just being human, the way that we handle our emotions, I think, is what causes the most problems in the world. Whether you want to look at it as problems between genders or race, a lot of it stems from emotion and not being able to express it. And I think a lot of people already kind of touched on that, but I wanted to share that because I definitely have been wanting to express that in my own life as well, and hopefully inspire other people to do that as well. So the song is called Crumble, and we're all gonna
have fun.
We're just gonna have fun. Okay.
Paper what's within, but I have found you behind that mask, and disguises never last. I watch it crumble, baby, crumble, darling, crumble, baby, crumble.
So unfortunately, Turkish music has a lot of songs about child brides, and that's unfortunately not a joke. This one is kind of a happy song. I know. This one is it's a folk tune. It's actually kind of the other perspective, from the perspective of the girl, actually. And she is, she didn't even hit puberty, so she's a kid, and she is about to get married. So she's married, and like her first couple of months, I guess, I don't know the timing, but she is kind of uncomfortable, but she's kind of trying to make the best of the experience. And that's kind of like a funny song in some ways, but in a way, I guess, very ironic way. I'm just going to translate the chorus. I had one satin doll and my dreams in my bag, but my girlhood has been incomplete, and I want my mama. Go.
Dağda belimde odun, beni ne hale kodun. Karlada ırgat avrathanede hazır atun. Bir uşak göbeğimde, altısı eteğimde. Yedi bitirdi beni anandaki o çene. Dünyanın gailesi yetmezmiş gibi bir de. El ayak çekilince sen bitersin dibimde. Dünyanın gailesi yetmezmiş gibi bir de. El ayak çekilince sen bitersin dibimde. Uy çalsın kemençeler de ben bir horon tepeyim. Çatlasın kanım giller bari kurtlarım dökeyim. Uy çalsın kemençeler de ben bir horon tepeyim. Çatlasın kanım giller bari kurtlarım dökeyim. Fındığı ben toplarım, kırması sana düşer. Uyelerin iyisi, gek yerinip şişer. Üşüdüm senden baba, ocağı gözümde tüter. Uy adaletsiz dünya, gücün hep bize mi yeter? Bir bezden bebem vardı, bohçamda hayallerim. Kızlığım yarım kaldı, ben annemi isterim. Çatlasın uyu çalsın kemençelerde, ben bir horon tepeyim. Çatlasın kanım giller, bari kurtlarım da. Thank you. Oh, it is on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being part of tonight.